The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September 1883, informing Zachary Kane that he now owned a cattle ranch in Texas he had never seen, inherited from an uncle he barely remembered meeting once as a child. Zachary folded the thin paper carefully and slipped it into his vest pocket, his calloused fingers lingering there for a moment as he stared out the train window at the passing landscape. The rolling green hills of Missouri were gradually giving way to flatter terrain, and with each mile that clattered beneath the iron wheels, he was leaving behind everything familiar. His job as a ranch hand, his small rented room above the general store, the Tuesday night poker games with men whose faces he would probably forget within a year. None of it had ever felt like home anyway. The inheritance had come at the perfect time, though Zachary felt a pang of guilt for thinking it. His uncle Silas had been a stranger, really, but the man had given him an opportunity that most cowboys could only dream about: land, a future, something to build on instead of drifting from one job to the next, aging in the saddle with nothing to show for decades of hard work, but scars and stiff joints. 3 days later, the stagecoach dropped him off on the dusty main road of Fort Worth, Texas, his saddlebag slung over one shoulder and his rifle case in the other hand. The September heat hit him like a wall, different from Missouri heat, drier and more relentless. Sweat immediately began to gather at the small of his back beneath his cotton shirt. The lawyer's office was easy to find, a narrow building sandwiched between a saloon and a dress shop. Mr. Henderson was a thin man with wire spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, and he spoke in the rapid, efficient manner of someone who had too many clients and not enough hours in the day. "The Diamond K Ranch," Henderson said, shuffling through papers on his cluttered desk. 500 acres, give or take. Your Uncle Silas ran cattle on it for near about 20 years. Good water supply, decent grazing land. Had some trouble with drought last year, but nothing that did permanent damage. Zachary nodded, trying to absorb the information. 500 acres. It seemed impossible. "Now, there's something I need to make clear before you head out there," Henderson continued, finally finding the document he was looking for. He looked up at Zachary over his spectacles. "There's a woman on the property, has been for the past 3 years. Zachary felt his eyebrows rise. "A woman?" "Hannah Frost. She came to the area about 3 years back, needed work. Your uncle hired her as a housekeeper initially, but after he took ill, she ended up managing the whole operation. Kept the ranch running when Silas was too sick to get out of bed. She was with him when he passed." "I see," Zachary said slowly. He had not expected this complication. "And she's still there now?" "Yes. The thing is, your uncle's will has a particular clause regarding Miss Frost." Henderson pushed the document across the desk. "She has the right to remain on the property for as long as she wishes. She's to receive room and board in exchange for her continued work on the ranch. Your uncle was very specific about this. He wanted to make sure she was taken care of." Zachary read through the legal language, frowning slightly. "So I inherit the ranch, but she inherits the right to stay there." "That's one way of putting it," Henderson said. "Your uncle thought very highly of her. Without her, the ranch would have fallen apart this past year. The cattle would have been scattered or stolen, the buildings would have gone to ruin. She's been managing it all alone." "Alone?" Zachary looked up sharply. "You mean there's no crew, no ranch hands?" Henderson shook his head. "Your uncle had to let them go when he got sick. Couldn't afford to pay them. Miss Frost has been handling everything herself since then. I've been out there twice on business matters, and I'll tell you, Mr. Kane, that woman works harder than most men I know." Zachary sat back in his chair, processing this information. He had expected to arrive at a working ranch, to step into a role managing a crew and learning the lay of the land. Instead, he was inheriting a woman who apparently knew more about his own property than he did. "Is there a problem?" Henderson asked, watching him carefully. "No," Zachary said after a moment. "No problem, just different from what I expected." Henderson smiled slightly. "The West has a way of defying expectations, Mr. Kane. You'll find that out soon enough." An hour later, Zachary was riding a rented horse along the dusty road that led northwest from Fort Worth, the directions from Henderson's clerk committed to memory. The land opened up around him, vast and brown and beautiful in its starkness. He had worked ranches before, but always as hired help, always knowing that none of it belonged to him. This feeling was entirely different. Somewhere ahead was land that bore his name now, even if he had done nothing to earn it. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when he spotted the ranch buildings in the distance. They sat in a shallow valley, arranged around a central yard. The main house was a low structure with a covered porch, built from rough-hewn timber and stone. Behind it stood a barn, a bunkhouse, and several smaller outbuildings. Fences stretched out in various directions, marking off corrals and pastures. Even from a distance, Zachary could see that everything was well maintained. The fences were straight and solid. The buildings showed no signs of disrepair. As he rode closer, he saw a figure emerge from the barn carrying 2 heavy water buckets. Even from this distance, he could tell it was a woman by the long skirt and the way she moved, though she wore a man's shirt with the sleeves rolled up past her elbows. She walked to a water trough and poured the buckets in, then straightened, pressing one hand to the small of her back as though it ached. Zachary guided his horse through the open gate and into the yard. The woman turned at the sound of hoofbeats, shading her eyes against the slanting sunlight. She did not move toward him or call out a greeting, just stood there watching as he approached. He dismounted a respectful distance away and removed his hat. "Madam, I'm looking for Hannah Frost. You found her." Her voice was steady, neither friendly nor unfriendly. She was younger than he had expected, probably close to his own age of 26. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her face was tanned from long hours in the sun. She had the kind of beauty that snuck up on a person, not flashy or obvious, but real and solid. Gray-green eyes regarded him with cautious intelligence. "I'm Zachary Kane," he said. "Silas Kane's nephew." Something shifted in her expression, though she remained guarded. "I heard you were coming. Mr. Henderson sent word last week." An awkward silence stretched between them. Zachary shifted his weight, suddenly unsure of himself in a way he rarely was. "I understand you've been running things here." "Someone had to." She set down the empty buckets. "Your uncle was a good man. I was sorry when he passed." "I wish I'd known him better," Zachary said honestly. "I only met him once when I was a boy." Hannah nodded slowly, her eyes still assessing him. He had the feeling he was being measured against some internal standard, and he was not certain he was measuring up. "You planning to work the ranch?" she asked. "Or are you one of those owners who sits in town and pays other people to do the actual labor?" There was a challenge in the question, and Zachary felt a flicker of irritation alongside a grudging respect. "I've been working ranches since I was 15 years old, Miss Frost. I'm not afraid of hard work." "Good," she said simply, "because there's plenty of it here." She gestured toward the barn. "You can put your horse up for the night. There's feed and water. I've got supper on if you're hungry. We can talk about the ranch after we eat." She turned and walked toward the house without waiting for his response, her skirt kicking up small puffs of dust with each step. Zachary watched her go, then shook his head slightly and led his horse toward the barn. The interior of the barn was clean and organized, smelling of hay and horses and leather. There were 8 stalls, but only 3 horses currently in residence. Zachary unsaddled the rented horse and rubbed it down, taking his time, delaying the moment when he would have to go into that house and figure out how to navigate this strange situation. When he finally walked up to the house, his saddlebag over his shoulder, he paused on the porch. Through the window he could see Hannah moving around the kitchen, her movements efficient and practiced. He knocked on the door frame and she looked up. "Doors open," she called. The interior of the house was simple but comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace at one end and a sturdy wooden table in the center. Doorways led off to what must be bedrooms. Everything was clean and orderly, with small touches that spoke of someone who cared about making a house a home. A jar of wildflowers on the table, curtains at the windows, a braided rug by the fireplace. "There's 2 bedrooms," Hannah said, not looking up from the pot she was stirring. "Your uncle's room is the one on the left. I've been using the smaller one on the right. I cleaned out Silas's things last month, figured you would want the bigger room." "You didn't have to do that," Zachary said, "needed doing." She carried the pot to the table and set it down on a thick cloth. "It's just stew, nothing fancy. It smells good." They ate in uncomfortable silence for the first few minutes. The stew was excellent, thick with vegetables and tender beef, seasoned perfectly. Zachary was hungrier than he had realized, and he ate steadily, aware of Hannah watching him between her own bites. "Mr. Henderson told you about the arrangement?" she asked finally. Zachary nodded. "He said you have the right to stay on as long as you want, room and board in exchange for work. That bother you?" He looked up at her, meeting her eyes directly. "Should it?" She held his gaze. "Some men wouldn't want a woman around, would think it wasn't proper or that I couldn't pull my weight." "Some men are fools," Zachary said. "From what I can see, you've been doing the work of 3 people. I'd be a fool to object to that." For the first time, something like a smile touched the corners of her mouth, though it did not quite reach her eyes. "We'll see if you still feel that way after you've been here a while. Tell me about the ranch," he said. "The stock, the land, what needs doing." Hannah sat back in her chair, and he watched as she transformed from a guarded woman into someone who knew her subject thoroughly and was passionate about it. She told him about the 150 head of cattle currently scattered across the grazing land, about the water sources, and which pastures were best for different seasons. She explained the finances with a frankness that he appreciated, not trying to hide the fact that money was tight and would be until they could get the herd built back up and ready for market. "Your uncle had to sell off a lot of stock to pay for his medicine," she said. "And when he passed, I didn't have the authority to make any major decisions. I've just been maintaining what we had, keeping the cattle together, making sure nothing fell apart." "You did more than maintain," Zachary said. "Henderson told me the place would have been lost without you." She shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Silas gave me a chance when I needed it. I owed him that much." "Where are you from originally?" he asked, "if you don't mind my asking." Hannah's expression shuddered slightly. "Ohio, came west with my father after my mother died. He had dreams of starting fresh, finding gold or rich farmland or something." She looked down at her empty bowl. "He died 2 winters after we arrived, pneumonia." "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Zachary could hear the old pain underneath. "I bounced around for a while, working where I could. Ended up in Fort Worth 3 years ago, and someone told me Silas was looking for help. He was already sick by then, though neither of us knew how bad it would get." "It couldn't have been easy," Zachary said. "Taking care of a dying man and a ranch." "Nothing out here is easy," Hannah said. "But at least it's honest work, At least I can go to bed at night knowing I earned my keep." There was something in the way she said it that made Zachary wonder what other kinds of work she had been offered, what she had turned down to maintain her independence and dignity. The West was not always kind to women alone. They talked for another hour, and gradually the conversation became easier, less guarded. Hannah told him about the neighbors, about which ones could be trusted and which ones had tried to take advantage when they thought a woman alone was easy prey. She described the nearest town for supplies, the routes to avoid during heavy rain, the best places to find stray cattle. Zachary found himself watching her as she talked, noticing the way her hands moved to illustrate a point, the way her whole face changed when she smiled at some memory. She was beautiful, he realized, though he suspected she would dismiss the observation as irrelevant. There was a strength in her that went beyond physical capability, a core of steel that had been forged by loss and hardship and survival. "I should warn you," Hannah said as she stood to clear the dishes. "Some of the neighboring ranchers are going to test you. They'll want to see what kind of man you are, whether you know what you're doing." "Let them test," Zachary said, standing to help her. "I'm not worried." She gave him a sidelong look. "You're more confident than you were when you first rode up," he smiled. "Maybe that's because I know more now than I did then." That night, lying in a bed that had belonged to an uncle he barely remembered, Zachary stared at the dark ceiling and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of his new home. Somewhere in the next room, Hannah Frost was probably already asleep, exhausted from another day of backbreaking work. Tomorrow, he would start learning everything he needed to know to make this ranch succeed. Tomorrow, he would prove that he was worthy of the gift his uncle had given him. But tonight, he could not stop thinking about gray-green eyes and the way a guarded woman had slowly begun to trust him with her knowledge and experience. He told himself it was just gratitude, just respect for her capabilities. But there was something else there too, something he was not quite ready to name. The rooster woke him before dawn, and Zachary dressed quickly in the dark, pulling on his work clothes and boots. When he emerged from his room, he found Hannah already in the kitchen, coffee brewing on the stove. "Morning," she said, handing him a cup without preamble. "We've got a full day ahead. Thought we would ride the north pasture, check on the cattle there. Then we need to repair some fence along the eastern boundary. Spotted some damage last week but haven't had time to fix it." Zachary took the coffee gratefully, savoring the strong, bitter taste. "Sounds good. I'm here to work, so put me to use." They ate a quick breakfast of eggs and bread, then headed out to the barn. Zachary saddled his own horse while Hannah saddled hers, a sturdy sorrel mare with intelligent eyes. "That's Copper," Hannah said, seeing him looking. "Best cow pony I've ever had. Your uncle gave her to me 2 years ago." They rode out as the sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky pink and gold. The morning air was cool, a relief from yesterday's heat, and Zachary breathed it in deeply, feeling something settle in his chest. This was what he had been looking for without quite knowing it, this sense of space and possibility. Hannah led them across the rangeland at an easy pace, pointing out landmarks and explaining boundaries as they went. She sat her horse like someone who had been born in the saddle, comfortable and natural. Occasionally, she would rein in to point out a particular plant or rock formation, adding to his mental map of the property. When they reached the north pasture, they found about 40 head of cattle grazing peacefully, the morning sun glinting off their hides. Hannah pulled a small leather journal from her saddlebag and made some notes, counting heads and checking their condition from a distance. "They look good," Zachary observed. "They are, mostly," Hannah agreed. "But see that heifer there, the red one with the white face? She's been limping. I need to get a closer look, make sure it's nothing serious." She dismounted and approached the cattle slowly, speaking in a low, soothing voice. The heifer allowed her to get close enough to examine the affected leg, though she shifted nervously. Hannah ran her hands down the leg carefully, then nodded to herself and stepped back. "Just a bruise, I think," she said when she returned to her horse. "Nothing that needs treatment. I'll keep an eye on her, make sure it doesn't get worse." They spent the morning riding the boundaries of the North pasture, and Zachary was impressed by Hannah's knowledge. She knew each section of land intimately, could tell him which areas held water longest after rain, which draws the cattle favored in hot weather, where predators were most likely to lurk. "You've put in a lot of work here," he said as they paused to let the horses drink from a small creek. Hannah shrugged. "It needed doing. Besides, I like the work, like being outside, being useful, better than being cooped up in town." "Is that where you worked before?" "In town, for a while," she said, her tone discouraging further questions on that subject. "We should head back, get started on that fence." They returned to the ranch house for a quick lunch, then loaded fence repair supplies into a wagon and headed east. The damaged section was about a mile from the main buildings, where several posts had rotted and the wire was sagging dangerously low. "Cattle could push through here easy," Hannah said, examining the damage. "And if they got out onto the neighboring land, we'd have hell getting them back. The man whose property borders here, name's Carlton Wexler, he's not friendly. Would probably claim any strays as his own." "That legal?" Zachary asked, already digging a new post hole. "Out here, legal is whatever you can enforce," Hannah said. She hefted a post hole digger with practiced ease. "Wexler's got a dozen men working for him. We've got you and me. That's the kind of math that matters more than what's written in a law book." They worked side by side through the afternoon, and Zachary found himself enjoying the rhythm of it, the straightforward satisfaction of fixing something broken. Hannah worked without complaint, doing the heavy labor without hesitation. When they needed to stretch new wire, she held the post steady while he pulled it taut and nailed it in place. "You're good at this," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I've had practice," she replied. Then, after a pause, "You're not bad yourself, for a new owner." There was a teasing note in her voice that made him smile. "I was a ranch hand for 11 years before I was an owner. Learned to work before I learned to give orders." "Good," Hannah said. "The men who know how to work are the ones worth following." The sun was setting by the time they finished the repairs and headed back to the ranch. They were both dirty and exhausted, but the fence was solid, and Zachary felt the satisfaction of a good day's work in his tired muscles. Over supper that night, they talked more easily than they had the previous evening. Hannah told him about the other ranchers in the area, giving him information he would need to navigate the local politics and alliances. She had a dry sense of humor that surprised him, and more than once he found himself laughing at some observation or story. "There's a cattlemen's association that meets once a month in Fort Worth," she said. "Your uncle used to attend before he got too sick. Might be worth you going to the next one, letting people know you're here and serious about running the ranch." "Makes sense," Zachary agreed. "When's the next meeting?" "Week from Saturday. I can manage things here while you're gone. Or you could come with me," he suggested. "Seems like you know these people better than I do." Hannah looked surprised. "They don't exactly welcome women at those meetings." "Then maybe it's time they got used to it," Zachary said. "You're as much a part of this ranch as I am, more since you've been keeping it alive." She studied him for a long moment, and he could not quite read her expression. "You mean that?" "I do." "Most men wouldn't," she said quietly. "Most men would want me to stay in the background, let them take credit for what I've done." "I'm not most men," Zachary said. "And I don't want credit that isn't mine." Something shifted between them in that moment, some barrier lowering slightly. Hannah smiled, a real smile this time that reached her eyes and transformed her entire face. Zachary felt his breath catch slightly in his chest. "All right then," she said. "We'll go together." The next week fell into a pattern. They rose before dawn, worked through the day, and spent their evenings planning and talking. Zachary learned the ranch quickly, but he was smart enough to defer to Hannah's greater experience. When he had ideas, he presented them as suggestions rather than orders, and they would discuss the merits and drawbacks until they reached an agreement. It was a partnership, he realized, though he was not sure when exactly it had become one. They worked together smoothly, anticipating each other's movements and thoughts in a way that usually took people much longer to develop. He found himself looking forward to their evening conversations, to the way her eyes lit up when she talked about something she was passionate about, to the rare but genuine laughs he could sometimes coax from her. He was falling for her. The realization hit him one morning as he watched her gentle a skittish calf, her voice soft and patient, her movements careful and kind. He had known her for less than 2 weeks, but somehow she had become essential to his idea of what this life could be. The problem was, he had no idea how she felt about him. She had grown more relaxed around him, more willing to smile and joke, but that did not mean her feelings went beyond respect and growing friendship. He was her employer, technically, even if he had never felt that way. The power imbalance made everything complicated. Saturday arrived, and they made the trip into Fort Worth together in the wagon. Hannah had changed into her one nice dress, a simple blue cotton that nonetheless made Zachary very aware that she was a woman, not just a capable ranch partner. She caught him looking and raised an eyebrow. "Something wrong?" she asked. "No," he said quickly. "You look nice. It's just a dress." "I know, but you still look nice." She did not respond, but he saw a faint flush rise in her cheeks that pleased him more than it probably should have. The Cattlemen's Association met in a room above the Fort Worth Bank. When Zachary and Hannah climbed the stairs, the conversation in the room died down noticeably. About 20 men stood around talking, and every one of them turned to stare at Hannah. "Kane," one man said, stepping forward. He was in his 50s with gray hair and a weathered face. "Heard you'd taken over the Diamond K. I'm Robert Tanner, own the Circle T to the west of you." Zachary shook his hand. "Good to meet you. This is Hannah Frost. She's been running the Diamond K and knows more about ranching in this area than I do." Tanner's eyes flickered to Hannah, his expression uncertain. "Madam," he said politely but without warmth. Other men came forward to introduce themselves, and the reception ranged from polite confusion to thinly veiled hostility. One man, who introduced himself as Carlton Wexler, barely acknowledged Hannah's presence at all. "Interesting that you brought your housekeeper to a business meeting," Wexler said, his tone making it clear what he thought of the choice. "Miss Frost is my ranch partner," Zachary said evenly. "She's been managing the Diamond K for the better part of a year. I value her expertise." "A woman managing a ranch," Wexler said with a thin smile. "That explains why the Diamond K has been struggling." Zachary felt his temper flare, but before he could respond, Hannah put a light hand on his arm. "The Diamond K has been struggling because Silas Kane died and left no working capital and no crew," she said calmly. "Despite that, we haven't lost a single head of cattle to theft or mismanagement. Our property is well maintained, and our books are in order. Can you say the same, Mr. Wexler?" "I seem to recall hearing that you lost 50 head to rustlers last spring." Wexler's face reddened. "That was an unfortunate incident." "I'm sure it was," Hannah said pleasantly. "Good thing you have a dozen men working for you to prevent such things. Must be embarrassing when it happens anyway." Several of the other men coughed or looked away, hiding smiles. Zachary had to work hard not to grin. Wexler glared at Hannah, then turned and walked away without another word. The meeting itself was mostly discussion of cattle prices and shipping schedules, debate about water rights and grazing land. Zachary contributed when he could, but mostly he listened and learned. Hannah stayed quiet for most of it, but when the conversation turned to a dispute about boundary lines between two ranchers, she spoke up with information about surveyor marks and legal descriptions that helped settle the argument. Afterward, as people were leaving, Robert Tanner approached them again. "Miss Frost," he said, his tone more respectful than it had been earlier. "I wanted to apologize for being short with you when you arrived. My wife reminded me that Silas spoke highly of you, said you'd saved his ranch." "I should have remembered that." Hannah nodded graciously. "No offense taken, Mr. Tanner. If you and Kane need any help getting established, you let me know," Tanner said. "Silas was a good neighbor. I'd like to be the same to you both." On the ride home, Hannah was quiet. Zachary glanced at her several times, trying to read her expression in the fading light. "That was interesting," he said finally. "That was predictable," Hannah corrected. "Most of them think women don't belong in business discussions. You proved them wrong." "Did I?" She sounded tired. "Or did I just make enemies we can't afford?" Zachary pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her. "Hannah, look at me." She did, her eyes reflecting the last light of the sunset. "You belonged in that room as much as any of them," he said. "More, because you actually know what you're talking about, while half of them were just full of hot air. I'm not going to ask you to hide what you can do or pretend to be less than you are. Not for them, not for anyone." "Why?" she asked softly. "Why does it matter to you?" "Because I'm falling in love with you," he thought. "Because the idea of you diminishing yourself for anyone makes me angry. Because you're extraordinary and you deserve to be recognized for it." But he could not say those things, not yet, not when he was still her employer and she might feel obligated or pressured. "Because it's the right thing," he said instead. "And because this ranch belongs to both of us, in all the ways that matter." Hannah looked at him for a long moment, something vulnerable and uncertain in her eyes. Then she smiled, small and genuine, and turned to face forward again. "We should get home," she said. "There's work tomorrow." But her hand, he noticed, rested on the wagon seat between them, close enough that when he picked up the reins, his arm brushed against hers. And she did not pull away. The seasons began to shift toward autumn, and the work on the ranch intensified as they prepared for winter. They moved cattle to different pastures, repaired the barn roof, and stocked up on supplies. Zachary hired 2 temporary hands to help with the heaviest work, and he made sure they understood that Hannah's word carried the same weight as his own. The men, both experienced ranch hands down on their luck, accepted this with minimal grumbling. It helped that Hannah could outwork both of them and was not afraid to prove it. One October afternoon, Zachary and Hannah were working together to break a new horse to saddle, a young gelding with spirit but not meanness. Hannah had him on a long line in the corral, talking to him in her low, patient voice while Zachary watched and offered suggestions. "He's got good bones," Zachary observed. "Where did you get him?" "Bought him off a farmer who didn't have time to train him properly," Hannah said. "Got him cheap because he's stubborn." "Stubborn can be good," Zachary said. "Means he has character." Hannah laughed. "Is that what we're calling it?" The horse chose that moment to decide he had enough of the whole training process and reared up, pulling hard on the line. Hannah held firm, her boots digging into the dirt, but the horse outweighed her by a considerable margin and was dragging her across the corral. Zachary vaulted the fence and grabbed the line with her, adding his weight and strength to hers. Together they brought the horse back under control, and Hannah praised him softly until he settled, snorting and pawing but no longer fighting. "Thanks," Hannah said, slightly breathless. She had not let go of the line, but Zachary realized his hands were still covering hers, and they were standing very close together. "Anytime," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. She looked up at him, and he saw her pupils dilate slightly, saw the way her breathing quickened. The air between them felt charged, electric with possibility. He wanted to kiss her so badly it was almost painful, but he held himself still, afraid of pushing too fast, of ruining what they had built. Hannah swallowed hard. "We should get him settled for the day. It's getting late." "Right," Zachary said, forcing himself to step back. "You're right." They worked in careful silence after that, both of them hyper-aware of each other. When their hands accidentally brushed as they closed the gate, Zachary felt the contact like a spark. That night, after a quiet supper, they sat on the porch as had become their habit when the weather was pleasant. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by any town lights. Hannah sat in one of the wooden chairs, and Zachary leaned against the porch railing, ostensibly looking at the night sky but mostly watching her from the corner of his eye. "Can I ask you something?" Hannah said suddenly. "Of course. Why did you really come here?" "I mean, you could have sold the ranch site unseen, taken the money and done something else with it. Why take on all this work and responsibility?" Zachary considered the question. "I've been working other people's ranches my whole adult life. I was good at it, but it never felt like it meant anything, you know. At the end of the day, I was just another hired hand. Replaceable. When I got word about the inheritance, it felt like a chance to build something that mattered, something that was mine." "And now," Hannah asked, "how do you feel now that you're here?" "Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," he said honestly. "This place, this work, it feels right in a way nothing else ever has." "I know what you mean," Hannah said softly. "I felt that way when I first came here. Like I had finally found something worth fighting for." "You could have left," Zachary pointed out. "After Sela's died, you could have gone somewhere easier, somewhere you didn't have to work so hard." "I thought about it," Hannah admitted. "But this ranch, it was the first place that felt like home since my father died. The first place where I felt like I belonged. I couldn't just abandon it." "I'm glad you didn't," Zachary said. "Not just because the ranch would have failed without you, because I can't imagine being here without you." Hannah turned to look at him, her eyes wide. "Zachary, I know I'm your employer," he said quickly. "I know the power dynamic is complicated and the last thing I want is to make you uncomfortable, but I need you to know that I see you, Hannah. Not just as a partner in this ranch, but as an extraordinary woman. You're smart and capable and strong, and you make this place better just by being in it. You make me better." "You're not just my employer," Hannah said, her voice shaking slightly. "You haven't been for a while now. You're my partner, yes, but you're also my friend, and I think maybe you're becoming more than that." Zachary's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "More than that," he echoed. Hannah stood and crossed the porch to him, stopping just a foot away. "I never thought I would want this," she said. "Want someone. After everything I've been through, after all the times men have disappointed or hurt me, I thought I was better off alone. But then you showed up and you listened to me, and you treated me like an equal, and I started to feel things I thought I'd locked away forever." "Hannah," he breathed. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her face gently in his hands. Her skin was warm beneath his palms, soft despite the work-roughened calluses he knew she had on her own hands. "I'm scared," she whispered, "of what this means, of how much I'm starting to need you." "I'm scared too," he admitted, "but I think maybe the best things in life are a little scary." She leaned into his touch, her eyes searching his face. "Promise me something, anything. Promise me you won't try to change me, That you won't decide one day that you want someone softer, more conventional. Hannah Frost, Zachary said firmly, you are perfect exactly as you are. I don't want someone soft or conventional. I want you exactly you, with all your strength and stubbornness and everything that makes you who you are. She smiled then, a brilliant, joyful smile that took his breath away. Then kiss me, you fool. He did, pulling her close and capturing her lips with his. She melted against him, her arms wrapping around his neck as she kissed him back with an intensity that made his knees weak. She tasted like the coffee they had drunk with dinner and something else, something uniquely her, and he could not get enough of it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hannah laughed breathlessly. Well, she said, I've wanted to do that for weeks. Weeks? Zachary grinned. Try since about the second day I was here. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was terrified of scaring you off, he admitted. You're the best thing in my life, Hannah. I couldn't risk losing you. You won't lose me, she said, going up on her toes to kiss him again, softer this time, sweeter. I'm not going anywhere. They stood there on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, kissing under the stars until the night grew cold and they reluctantly went inside. At the doorway to their separate rooms they paused. Good night, Hannah said, her hand still in his. Good night, he replied, raising her hand to his lips. Sweet dreams. They will be now, she said, smiling at him over her shoulder as she disappeared into her room. Zachary lay awake for a long time that night, too happy and wired to sleep. Everything had changed, and yet nothing had changed. They were still partners in the ranch, still friends and allies. But now they were also something more, something with infinite potential. The next morning, they were both a little shy with each other at first, but that awkwardness melted away as they fell into the familiar rhythm of morning chores. Except now, Zachary felt free to touch her as he passed, a hand on her shoulder or her back. And Hannah would lean into those touches, or catch his hand and squeeze it, and every small contact felt like a revelation. The two temporary hands noticed the change in the air between them, but they were smart enough to keep their mouths shut. Cowboys learned early that gossiping about the boss was a good way to lose a job. A week later, a storm rolled in from the north, bringing cold rain and wind that rattled the windows. Zachary and Hannah spent the day securing everything they could, bringing the horses into the barn, checking and double-checking that the cattle in the near pastures had shelter. By evening, they were both soaked through and shivering despite the physical exertion. Hannah built up the fire in the fireplace while Zachary changed into dry clothes. When he emerged from his room, he found her standing by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, her hair loose and drying in waves around her shoulders. There's hot coffee, she said, gesturing to the pot on the stove. He poured 2 cups and brought one to her. They stood together by the fire, listening to the rain pound against the roof and the wind howl around the corners of the house. Reminds me of the winter my father died, Hannah said quietly. It was a storm like this. He went out to check on our livestock and never came back. I found him the next morning, frozen in the snow. Zachary set down his cup and pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, resting her head against his chest. I'm sorry, he said. That must have been terrible. It was, she said. But it taught me that I was stronger than I thought, that I could survive things I never imagined having to face. You're the strongest person I know, Zachary said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. They stayed like that for a while, just holding each other, and Zachary realized this was what he wanted for the rest of his life. This easy comfort, this quiet intimacy. Not just passion, though he wanted that too, but partnership and trust and love. Marry me, he said suddenly, the words escaping before he could think them through. Hannah pulled back to look up at him, her eyes wide. What? Marry me, he repeated, more certain now. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few months, but Hannah, I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you never back down from a challenge. I love how you talk to the animals and how you look at sunrise and how you laugh when you think something is genuinely funny. I want to spend the rest of my life building this ranch with you, building a life with you. Zachary, she breathed, tears gathering in her eyes. I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes. Is that a yes? He asked, hardly daring to hope. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, of course, yes. He swept her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, pouring everything he felt into it, and she kissed him back with equal fervor. I don't have a ring, he said when they finally broke apart. I should have planned this better. I don't need a ring, Hannah said. I just need you. But the next time Zachary went into Fort Worth, he bought a simple gold band that he thought would suit her practical nature. He presented it to her that evening over supper, suddenly nervous as he pulled it from his pocket. It's not fancy, he said, but I wanted you to have something. Hannah took the ring with trembling fingers, her eyes shining. It's perfect, she whispered. She slipped it onto her finger, and it fit as though it had been made for her. They decided to marry quickly, not seeing any point in waiting. The ceremony took place in Fort Worth on a crisp November morning, with Robert Tanner and his wife Martha standing as witnesses. It was simple and brief, but when Zachary slipped a matching gold band onto his own finger and the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, he felt as though he had just made the most important commitment of his life. Martha Tanner insisted on hosting a small celebration dinner for them afterward, and Zachary was touched by the gesture. Some of the other ranchers from the Cattlemen's Association attended, and if there were those who still disapproved of Hannah's unconventional role, they at least had the grace not to say so at the wedding celebration. On the ride back to the ranch, Hannah dozed against Zachary's shoulder, exhausted from the excitement of the day. He drove the wagon carefully, not wanting to jostle her, and thought about how much his life had changed in just a few short months. That night, there was no awkwardness or uncertainty. They came together as naturally as they did everything else, and Zachary discovered that passion with someone you truly loved was something entirely different from anything he had experienced before. Afterward, lying tangled together in the bed that was now theirs, Hannah traced patterns on his chest with her fingertips. Happy, he asked, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Happier than I ever thought I could be, she admitted. Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and find out this was all a dream. Not a dream, he assured her. This is real. We're real. Winter settled over the ranch, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. Zachary and Hannah worked together to keep the cattle fed and the building secure. They spent long evenings by the fire, making plans for the spring when they would expand the herd and hire more permanent help. I was thinking, Hannah said one evening as they reviewed the account books together, we could use some breeding stock. If we bought a good bull and a few quality heifers, we could improve the whole herd over the next few years. Good idea, Zachary agreed. There's a stock sale in Dallas in February. We could make the trip, see what's available. That's a long trip in winter, Hannah pointed out. Then we'll bundle up and make an adventure of it, Zachary said, pulling her close. Besides, I wouldn't trust anyone else to pick good stock. You've got a better eye for cattle than anyone I know. The trip to Dallas was indeed an adventure. They traveled by train, a new experience for both of them, and stayed in a hotel that Hannah declared was far too fancy for practical ranchers. But Zachary noticed how her eyes lit up at the indoor plumbing and the soft beds, and he resolved to bring her to town more often, to give her some of the comforts she deserved. At the stock sale, Hannah walked the pens with the focused intensity of a general surveying troops. She examined bone structure and temperament, asked questions of the sellers, and finally selected a massive Hereford bull and 3 heifers that Zachary had to admit were exceptional animals. "They'll breed true," she said with satisfaction. "In 3 years, we'll have the best cattle in the county." On the train ride home, Hannah was quiet, staring out the window at the passing landscape. Zachary reached over and took her hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She turned to him with a soft smile. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. Zachary felt his heart stop and then start again, pounding hard. "You're sure?" "Pretty sure," she said. "I've suspected for a few weeks, but I wanted to wait until I was certain before I told you." He pulled her into his arms, not caring about the other passengers who might be watching. "Hannah, that's wonderful. That's incredible." "You're happy?" she asked, and he could hear the faint uncertainty in her voice. "Happy," he laughed, loud and joyful. "I'm over the moon. We're going to have a baby." They talked the whole rest of the journey about the future, about names and nurseries, and how they would manage the ranch work as Hannah's pregnancy progressed. Zachary was already making mental lists of tasks he would need to handle alone, of ways to lighten her load. But when they got home and he suggested she take it easy, Hannah gave him a look that could have melted steel. "I'm pregnant, not an invalid," she said firmly. "I'll work as long as I'm able and then I'll rest when I need to. Don't you dare start treating me like I'm fragile." "I just want to take care of you," he protested, her expression softened. "I know, and I love you for it. But taking care of me means trusting me to know my own limits, not deciding them for me." He learned over the following months to strike that balance between concern and trust. Hannah continued to work on the ranch, though she did accept his help with the heavier tasks as her belly grew. The temporary hands had moved on, but they hired a young man named Peter, who proved reliable and hardworking. Zachary made sure Peter understood that Hannah was to be respected and listened to, despite her condition. Spring arrived, and with it came the birth of the calves from their new breeding stock. Hannah glowed with pride as they inspected the healthy, strong-boned youngsters. "Told you they'd breed true," she said, leaning back against Zachary as they watched a calf nurse from its mother. "You're always right," he said, wrapping his arms carefully around her swollen belly. "Remember that," she teased. As summer heated up, Hannah finally agreed to limit her work to the lighter tasks. She managed the books, planned the work schedules, and handled the business side of the ranch while Zachary and Peter dealt with the physical labor. On a sweltering July afternoon, Hannah's labor began. Zachary sent Peter racing to town for the doctor while he helped Hannah to their bedroom, trying not to let his terror show on his face. "I'm fine," Hannah said, gripping his hand during a contraction. "Women have been doing this forever." "Not my woman," he said. "Not carrying my child." She managed a weak laugh. "Fair point." The doctor arrived, a calm woman named Dr. Sarah Mitchell who had delivered half the babies in the county. She examined Hannah and declared that everything was progressing normally, then suggested that Zachary make himself useful elsewhere. "I'm staying," Zachary said firmly. Dr. Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Most men can't handle being in the birthing room." "I'm not most men," Zachary said, "and I'm not leaving my wife." Hannah reached for his hand. "Stay," she said, "please." So he stayed, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement and love through the long hours of labor. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Zachary felt tears streaming down his face. "You did it," he whispered to Hannah as doctor. Mitchell placed the baby in her arms. "You're amazing." Hannah looked down at their son with wonder, touching his tiny fingers, his perfect little face. "He's beautiful," she breathed. He looks like you, Zachary said. He looks like himself, Hannah corrected, smiling. Hello, little one. Welcome to the world. They named him James, after Hannah's father, and from the moment he entered their lives, everything revolved around him. Zachary was amazed by how such a tiny person could completely take over their hearts and their home. Hannah recovered from the birth quickly, insisting on returning to light work within a few weeks despite Zachary's protests. But he noticed how she would pause in her tasks to nurse James, how her face would soften when she looked at their son, and he fell in love with her all over again. One evening, when James was about 2 months old, Zachary found Hannah on the porch, rocking their son to sleep in her arms. He sat down beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how different my life is now from what I thought it would be," she said. "A year and a half ago, I was alone on this ranch, not sure if I could keep it going, not sure where I belonged. Now I have you and James and a future I never dared to dream of." "You made all of this possible," Zachary said. "If you hadn't kept this ranch alive, I would have inherited nothing but dust and debt." "We made it possible," Hannah corrected. "Together." The years flowed by like water, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their family. When James was 2, Hannah became pregnant again, and this time they had a daughter they named Clara. 2 years after that came another son, Thomas. The ranch prospered under their joint management. They built the herd steadily, earned a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. Other ranchers learned to respect Hannah's expertise, and more than one asked her advice on breeding or land management. Zachary watched his children grow with a joy he had never imagined possible. James was serious and thoughtful, already showing an interest in the ranch work. Clara was wild and fearless, always getting into mischief. Thomas was gentle and observant, content to watch and learn. One spring evening, when the children were finally in bed after much protest and several glasses of water, Zachary and Hannah collapsed onto the porch swing together. "I'm exhausted," Hannah said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "3 children will do that," Zachary said with a laugh. "Remember when we thought the ranch work was tiring?" "Now the ranch is the easy part," Hannah agreed. "At least cattle don't argue about bedtime." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, rocking gently in the swing. The ranch spread out before them, peaceful in the fading light. In the corrals, the horses dozed. In the pastures, the cattle grazed contentedly. Everything they had built together, everything they had fought for. "Do you ever regret it?" Hannah asked suddenly. "Taking on the ranch, taking me on all of this." Zachary turned to look at her, touching her face gently. "Not for a single second," he said. "You and these children are the best thing that ever happened to me. This life we have built is more than I ever dreamed of having." "Even when Clara releases the chickens and we spend an hour chasing them around the yard," Hannah teased. "Even then," he confirmed, laughing, "though I could do without the chicken chasing." "I love you," Hannah said, kissing him softly. "Thank you for seeing who I really was, for never trying to change me." "I love you too," Zachary replied. "Thank you for taking a chance on a stranger who showed up claiming to own your home." "Our home," Hannah corrected. "It was always meant to be ours." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they stayed there together, planning for the future, remembering the past, grateful for the present. The ranch that had brought them together had become the foundation of a love that would last a lifetime. Years continued to pass, and their children grew into capable young adults. James, at 19, was already an excellent ranch manager, working alongside his parents with the same dedication they had always shown. Clara, at 17, had a gift for training horses that rivaled her mother's. Thomas, at 15, showed a talent for the business side of ranching. keeping meticulous records and finding ways to improve their profits. One day in late autumn, Zachary and Hannah rode out together to survey the north pasture, something they still did regularly even though their children were perfectly capable of handling it. Some traditions were too precious to abandon. "Remember the first time we rode out here together?" Zachary asked as they paused at the top of a rise, looking out over the land. "I was trying to figure out if you were going to be a problem or a partner," Hannah said with a smile. "And what did you decide?" "That you were going to be both," she said. "And I was right." They had built a good life together, a strong life. The Diamond K Ranch was one of the most respected operations in the area. Their children were healthy and happy. They had weathered droughts and hard winters, low cattle prices and difficult neighbors. They had done it all together, as partners, as lovers, as best friends. "I want to build an addition to the house," Hannah said suddenly. Zachary looked at her in surprise. "An addition? Why?" "Because our children are going to get married eventually," she said practically. "And I want their families to feel welcome here. I want room for grandchildren to visit, for everyone to gather together." "Already planning for grandchildren," Zachary teased, though the idea filled him with warmth. "I like to plan ahead," Hannah said. "You should know that by now." So they built the addition, working with their children to create more bedrooms and a larger gathering space. James helped with the heavy construction. Clara painted with enthusiastic, if not entirely accurate skill, and Thomas managed the budget and kept them from overspending. The first grandchild arrived 2 years later, when James married a sensible young woman named Elizabeth and had a son they named Zachary Jr. Holding his grandson for the first time, Zachary understood how his own parents must have felt, this mix of joy and pride and hope for the future. Clara married at 21, choosing a cowboy named Daniel who appreciated her wild spirit and matched her fearlessness. They had twin daughters who ran Hannah ragged with their energy and mischief. Thomas was the last to marry, waiting until he was 25 and had found a woman who shared his quiet, thoughtful nature. Their first child was a son, then a daughter, and their family grew steadily. The ranch house that had once held just Zachary and Hannah now rang with the laughter and chaos of children and grandchildren. Holiday gatherings were loud, joyful affairs with too much food and not enough space and exactly the right amount of love. One Christmas evening, after all the grandchildren had finally been settled into various beds throughout the house, Zachary and Hannah escaped to the porch for a moment of peace. It was cold, and they wrapped a blanket around themselves as they sat together on the swing. "This is everything I never knew I wanted," Hannah said softly. "A full house, a loud family, chaos and joy all mixed together." "It's pretty wonderful," Zachary agreed, "though I do miss the quiet sometimes." "Liar," Hannah said fondly. "You love every minute of it." He could not argue with that. At 60 years old, looking back on the life he had built with this extraordinary woman, Zachary could honestly say he had no regrets. Every challenge had been worth it. Every struggle had led to something beautiful. "You remember that first night I was here?" he asked. "When you made me stew and we were so awkward with each other." "I thought you were going to be insufferable," Hannah admitted. "Some fancy new owner who would try to tell me how to do everything wrong. And instead you turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me," she said, kissing him gently. "My partner, my love, my home." They sat together in the cold, wrapped in each other's warmth, listening to the sounds of their family sleeping peacefully inside. The ranch that had brought them together still stood strong, a legacy they would pass on to their children and grandchildren. As the years continued to advance, Zachary and Hannah gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, trusting their children to carry it forward. But they still rode out together most mornings, still checked on the cattle and the land they had tended for so many years. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together what seemed like half of Texas. Ranchers and townspeople, old friends and family, all gathered to celebrate the love story that had started with an inheritance. And a woman alone on a ranch, Robert Tanner, now elderly but still sharp, stood up to make a toast. 40 years ago, a young man came to Fort Worth and met his match in Hannah Frost, he said. Some of us were skeptical. He shot a meaningful look at a few of the other old ranchers, but Zachary and Hannah showed us what real partnership looks like. They built something strong together, something that will last for generations. To Zachary and Hannah Kane, the best neighbors and the finest example of true love I have ever known. Glasses were raised, and Zachary pulled Hannah close, kissing her soundly despite the whoops and hollers from their grandchildren. 40 years, Hannah said when the party finally wound down and they were alone in their bedroom. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you rode up to the ranch with your saddlebag and that nervous look on your face. I was terrified, Zachary admitted, of the responsibility of meeting you, of everything being different from what I expected. And was it? Hannah asked. Different from what you expected? Yes, he said. It was so much better. They lay together in the darkness, hands intertwined, hearts beating in the rhythm they had learned over 4 decades of love and partnership. I would do it all again, Hannah whispered. Every hard day, every struggle, every moment. If it meant ending up here with you, I would do it all the same. Me too, Zachary said. Exactly the same. More years passed, gentler now but still full of joy. Zachary and Hannah watched their grandchildren grow and start having children of their own. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management, with Clara and Thomas and their families all playing important roles. On a warm spring morning, when Zachary was 72 and Hannah was 70, they rode out together one last time to the north pasture. Their horses moved slowly, respecting their rider's age, but the joy of being out on the land together was undiminished. We did good, didn't we? Hannah asked, looking out over the thriving ranch. We did better than good, Zachary said. We built something beautiful. They sat on their horses side by side, hands clasped between them, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The land stretched out before them. The cattle grazed peacefully, and in the distance they could see the ranch house where their family still slept. Thank you, Hannah said softly. For what? For seeing me, she said. For loving me. For building this life with me. Hannah, Zachary said, his voice thick with emotion. Loving you was the easiest thing I ever did. It was everything else that was hard, but we did it together, and that made all the difference. They rode back to the house slowly, savoring every moment. When they arrived, the yard was already bustling with activity. Grandchildren ran around playing, their parents trying to corral them for breakfast. Great-grandchildren toddled after them, laughing with delight. James met them at the barn to help with the horses. Good ride? He asked. Perfect, Zachary said, exchanging a smile with Hannah. The family gathered for breakfast, a chaotic, joyful meal with too many people crowded around tables that had been pushed together. Zachary looked around at all the faces, all the lives that had come from the love he and Hannah had shared, and felt a profound sense of peace and completion. This was what mattered, not the size of the ranch or the number of cattle or the money in the bank. This family, this love, this legacy of partnership and respect and dedication. They had taken a struggling ranch and a lonely woman and a nervous new owner, and they had built something extraordinary. As the sun climbed higher in the sky and the family began to disperse to their various tasks and activities, Zachary pulled Hannah aside one more time. I love you, he said, as he had said countless times over the decades. More today than yesterday, and less than tomorrow. "I love you too," Hannah replied, touching his face with her work-worn hand. "My partner, my love, my everything." They stood together in the doorway of the house they had shared for so many years, watching their legacy unfold before them. 3 children, all married with families of their own. 11 grandchildren, some grown with children of their own, some still young and wild. 4 great-grandchildren so far, with more surely to come. The Diamond K Ranch had become more than just a piece of land or a business. It was a living testament to what 2 people could build when they worked together, when they loved each other, when they refused to give up no matter how hard things got. As evening fell, and the family gathered on the expanded porch for their traditional sunset watch, Zachary and Hannah sat in their familiar spot on the swing, surrounded by the people they loved most in the world. The children told stories, the grandchildren played, the great-grandchildren slept in their parents' arms. "This," Hannah whispered to Zachary, "this is what happily ever after looks like." And Zachary, holding the hand of the woman he had loved for more than 40 years, the woman who had been his partner and his equal and his greatest adventure, could only agree. The stars came out one by one, brightening in the darkening sky over Texas, over the ranch that had brought them together and the family they had built. And there, surrounded by love and legacy, Zachary and Hannah Kane lived out their days in the peaceful contentment of a life well lived and a love that would never fade. Their story, which had begun with an inheritance and a telegram and a woman alone on a ranch, had become a legend in its own right. People in Fort Worth still talked about the cowboy who had bought the Diamond K and fallen in love with the extraordinary woman who had been keeping it alive. They talked about the partnership that had built one of the finest ranches in Texas, about the love that had lasted through decades of hardship and joy. And on quiet nights, when the wind whispered through the pastures and the cattle settled down to sleep, some swore they could feel the spirit of that love still there, woven into the very fabric of the land, a testament to what was possible when 2 people found each other and chose to build something beautiful together.